Hello, hello. Welcome in, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our fourth and final session of advocacy training. We are so excited to have you with us today. Session 4 is really, really wonderful. And I'm super excited every time we have this session. I feel like I learned something new. It's going to be really, really awesome for you to learn all about event planning and fundraising. And again, if you are just joining us for the first time, sessions 1 through 3, those recordings are available on our YouTube channel. I'm going to drop that link in the chat in just a second. But first, go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat while we get started. I have to enable the chat for everyone first. Please hold. There you go. All right. So go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat. We'd love to hear your name, how old you are, where you're located, and let's just see if anybody has any event planning experience. I think it would be interesting to know kind of your background knowledge, and then we'll get started in just a second. And I'm going to pass it over to my lovely coworker, Sam.
Great. Thanks, Laura. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here with everybody. We're going to give it just a couple minutes, and then I know that Laura was excited to give a little bit of an introduction, kind of just like explain where we've come from at the beginning of this series 3 weeks ago, leading up to this final session on event planning. But yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and I can see folks are already popping in their introduction in the chat, so that's great. So Laura, I'll take it from you. So whenever you want to go ahead and kick it off, you can, start with your little intro and then pass it on back to me, and I'll get started on event planning.
Yeah. So yes, like Sam was saying, this is the 4th of 4 sessions in advocacy training. This is the first time we've had this advocacy training available to members of the public, and it's been really, really wonderful to have you all with us throughout the last 4 weeks. This has been a really wonderful learning experience, I think, for both Sam and I, putting this session and this program together, but also hearing our feedback from all of you and our viewers. Again, this is the last in the series, and we plan to have future advocacy trainings as well. So we hope that after World Ocean Day, which is coming up in just under 3 weeks, that eventually we will be able to have translated versions of this past program available for you to use. For those of you who do not speak English as a first language, we're hoping to have our slides and some of our captions translated as well. So hopefully we can get that out to all of you after World Ocean Day. I just want to introduce myself really quickly. My name is Laura Johnson. I'm the youth program supervisor for the Ocean Project, and I've been the one who's been emailing you a ton about this program. And if you do have any questions about advocacy training, any of our other youth initiative programs, such as the World Ocean Day Youth Advisory Council, feel free to send me an email at youth@theoceanproject.org. And now I will pass it back over to Sam so she can introduce herself.
Great. Thanks, Laura. So yes, hi, everybody. I'm Sam, and I am the Senior Program Manager here at the Ocean Project. And I also work with a couple other nonprofits on causes that I care about, including working to get fresh food into schools here in Pennsylvania in the United States, which is where I live in Philadelphia. So I saw a couple of folks also from the United States, someone from New Jersey. Hi, neighbor. That's so exciting, but also really great to see folks from all around the world. I also wanted to share a little bit about some of my background, which you can see here on the slide, but I have been working for basically 15 years, including some of my time at university and in college, to be a community organizer, most broadly speaking. And by that, I mean working within my own communities, a variety of different places that I've lived, to mobilize people to get involved and get engaged so that we can make a difference in the world. And I've worked on a ton of different types of initiatives and campaigns, including environmental campaigns, One of my favorite experiences was working when I lived in California with an organization that helped to ban single-use plastic bags so they wouldn't end up in our communities and our parks and obviously in our ocean, where they can be really harmful to wildlife and our communities. But I've also worked on a set of other issues too, helping to increase youth voter participation in elections here in the United States, and also a variety of other public health and education-oriented initiatives. So I have a lot of experience event planning and also just kind of recruiting and mobilizing people to a cause. And for those who have been involved in the series already and joined the first few sessions, I know you've been talking a lot about and hearing a lot from other folks about exactly how they've been working to do just that, make a difference, mobilize more people so that we can make a bigger difference in our community. So I'm really hoping today to build upon some of those amazing conversations that you've already been having for those who've been around, and for those who are just joining for the first time, don't worry, you don't need to have been involved in the past sessions to get hopefully a lot of great skills and tips out of this session. But we are really going to start from the top, or what sometimes I refer to as the big picture, thinking about why it's important to even hold events or activities or run campaigns for causes that you care about. So I'm also going to give a little bit of context as we go along here around how we at the Ocean Project and for World Ocean Day think about making change. So obviously, I think a lot of the lessons that you'll learn today can be applied to any type of issue or cause that you might care about. But again, I'm going to be kind of talking about how to do that from a conservation lens, and sometimes using some examples also about World Ocean Day, which is very excitingly coming up, like Laura mentioned. So to start, as you can see here, we've got this image that I wanted to chat about because here at the Ocean Project, we encourage any and all ways of working to support ocean conservation. And there's definitely a lot of different ways to make a difference. But one way to actually make sure you can figure that out for your own community is doing a couple things first. So it's important when you're starting to get engaged and thinking about taking on an issue to define your community. So maybe that's just your school community, or maybe it's your town, or maybe it's a change that you're trying to make for your entire country where you live. But you have to first define who it is that you're working to target. And then once you know who your community is, it's easier for you to ask yourself what matters to those people, or in the sense of conservation-oriented initiatives, what matters to the ecosystem that I'm living in here. And how you address that problem might vary depending on what you want to do. But any event or activity that you do plan on executing can be very strategically impactful if you think and plan in advance. And so that's what this photo on the slide here is helping us to illustrate. It's a pretty popular graphic, so some of you may have seen it, especially in organizing movements. And basically what it demonstrates is the power that many individuals can have when they are strategic and get organized. So in the top image, you can see that a bunch of fish are all swimming in the same area of water, but in whatever direction they want to. And every fish is focused probably on staying alive, but only some are actually going to escape that much larger predator. But then in the bottom image, you can see that all those same fish are actually organized. They're swimming together and in the same direction. And now they have the ability to take on a much larger predator, in this case, by creating the illusion that they are a much bigger fish. So in this scenario, more fish are even more likely to survive because they're working together strategically. Bottom line, if we all do work together strategically, just like those fish, toward an end goal, we're likely going to be more effective. And most of the time, that's because we're demonstrating that many people have the same desire, which is sometimes referred to as people power. And it's more likely that we'll bring about a solution to a problem, even one as big as stabilizing our ocean and our climate, like many of us are working to tackle, when we put our collective energy and efforts into a specific goal and strategy. So here at World Ocean Day, we specifically encourage people to be action-oriented in their event planning and activities, especially during World Ocean Day, but really any time of year. And for those who watched the second session in this advocacy training series, you'll remember Joe, who was our guest speaker there, talking about the importance of finding your conservation mission statement. So just like defining your audience and your community is an important first step to taking action and getting involved, so is defining what you're trying to do or your mission statement. So for World Ocean Day, just to give an example, each year our team at the Ocean Project spends time thinking about what the most strategic advocacy action could be for ocean conservation. And we call that our conservation action focus. On the next slide, we can kind of see a little bit here, and you can feel free to check out more about what we mean by our conservation action focus on our website or by scanning the QR code there, so that you can see that right now this year we're asking everybody to support the 30 by 30 movement, otherwise known as working to protect 30% of our lands, waters, and ocean by 2030, which I know some of you are very familiar with from being a part of the sessions. And when we think about what we want to have as our sort of theme or conservation action focus each year, we also want to make sure we think up what an easy ask could be of our audience. And our audience is a global audience. We work all around the world supporting organizations and businesses and individuals who want to get involved with World Ocean Day. And that can be kind of a tricky audience because there's a lot of different opinions and different viewpoints out there. But we've had a lot of success trying to figure out just a simple way that people can take action. And so this year, for example, we're asking everybody to fill out a survey answering the question, why do you care about protecting more of our lands, waters, and ocean? And that's what that QR code there will take you to. So I mentioned this obviously because World Ocean Day is coming up, and it's a really exciting opportunity for you to take action yourself and also spread the word. But also it's a really great example of getting pretty specific about who your audience is, what issue you want to take on, and giving people an easy way to get engaged, which we recommend in any event planning activity. And if you want to learn more about that, you can go to the website. I also dropped it in the chat. But for the rest of this session, we're going to talk about some tips and tools to help you plan your own campaigns and activities and events. And almost all of the content included here can definitely be applied to any type of activity or event you might want to take on. So you can kind of see here on this slide, there are a variety of different types of, what we broadly call events. There are very specific things like beach cleanups or an educational webinar, or it could be an ongoing series, kind of like this training that we're running, or maybe something a little bit less time bound. Like you can see some examples of activities on the right-hand slide here that talk more about discussing a particular campaign or talking about launching an initiative that you're trying to run. So there's a lot of different kinds of events and activities. And I think for the most part, all of these different tips and tools that we're going to go over in our session today can be applied to any type of event like this. So I'm kind of curious, I know we've had a little participation in the chat here. If anybody has an example of an event or an activity that you participated in the past, or maybe that you even put on yourself, I'd love for you to share that in the chat. You can put either the type of event that you ran, or if there was a specific cause that the event was kind of prioritizing, that would be cool to share. So yeah, even just a few words about any type of event you participated in would be great to see. Okay, cool. We've got some coming in here. A lionfish hunt. Wow, that sounds interesting. What else? What other types of events or activities have people participated in? Okay, someone says, in my association, we organized a campaign to reutilize school materials. Great. A litter pickup. Cool. Any others? I have already organized, together with the Young Environment Collective here in Brazil, a national youth meeting with other collectives. Wow, great. That sounds very collaborative as well. Making bird feeders from plastic bottles. Cool. These are awesome. Thank you guys for sharing some of the examples that you have. Keep them coming. And before we dive into the logistics of our event planning lesson, I actually wanted to engage everybody in a little exercise. So similar to the ideas you guys have put in the chat already, I want everybody to think about a time when you participated in an event or activity in the past. So something that hasn't happened yet. And maybe it was cause related for something that you cared about. I know for me, it's kind of helpful when doing these exercises to kind of close my eyes so I can reduce distraction. So if that's helpful for you, feel free to close your eyes as I lead us through a couple questions about this event. I'll give everyone a minute to think of a memory. So just like we mentioned, it could be a cleanup, an educational webinar, maybe it was a festival, whatever it is, just pick one specific event. Okay, now that everyone hopefully has an event in your mind, start to try and recall what you experienced during that event. Where was it located? Were you outside? Was it online? Were you in a new, unfamiliar place? Or were you in a place you knew really well? Who was there with you? Did you go with friends, family, or were you on your own? What do you remember seeing or hearing during the event? Did you eat food or participate in a specific activity? And now think for a minute what you remember feeling when you were at the event, or even when you left the event. Maybe you were excited or nervous, happy, sad, angry even. Were you having fun? Did you meet new people? Do you remember getting something out of the event? Maybe you got something tangible, like a t-shirt, or you made a new friend, or maybe you got something less tangible, like a feeling of hope or motivation to get more involved in the future. So if you close your eyes, you can go ahead and open them again now. And whatever you remembered from your experience, that exercise of thinking back on how you felt can be really helpful when you're planning your own events and activities, so that you can kind of create a certain type of experience for others as well. And what's equally as important is reminding yourself that not everyone has the same experience from a certain activity. And that's due to a lot of different factors related to our background and our own personal interests, or our nature, even if we're more introverted or extroverted. But one major reason why two individuals may feel differently during or after a similar experience is related to motivations. So the last kind of exercise or bigger picture piece of this lesson that I want to talk about is social motivations. So there's generally 4 core motivations that an individual person might have when they're thinking about joining a cause or coming to an event. And those are listed here: altruistic, social, transactional, and self-interest. And usually everyone has a combination of these motivations. So you might not just say I'm purely altruistic. You probably also have a little bit of social motivation or maybe a transactional motivation. But it can be helpful to think about what's your main motivation right now. So just for example, to give some details of events or feelings that might come with each of these motivations. For altruistic, perhaps you recently learned about ocean pollution in a class or from a video online, and you feel motivated to do something to reduce ocean pollution. In this case, you're probably feeling altruistically motivated to do something because you're excited and eager to make a difference. So if you're thinking about an event to go to, you might decide that participating in an event or an activity where you can really see the impact of your actions, like a beach cleanup, for example, rather than an activity where you are only learning about the problems and solutions, again, like a webinar, might be more attractive to you because of your motivation. Similarly, for social motivations, if you're new to a community, maybe you just started college or you moved to a new town, you may really want to make new friends and find people who share your values or interests. And in that case, you might be more interested in an event or activity where you can actually meet up with other people, work alongside them, chat a little bit, and there's time and space for you to make connections rather than an activity kind of like this webinar where you're kind of there with people, but you're not really getting to meet new folks in a deeper way. So you might choose to go to certain types of events over others if you have social motivations like that. And then for transactional, in some cases, you may also be more motivated by the idea of getting something tangible from an activity. For example, if there's a festival or a conference and it's related to a cause you care about, you might be interested, but you'll be even more likely to go if you know that you can get a t-shirt because you're going to volunteer, or for a registration fee, or maybe you get food because it's an all-day event. So there's something that you kind of get back in a transactional type of way. Similarly, for students, I'm sure many of you have experienced this. No matter what age you are, you can get usually extra credit or class credit for attending a volunteer activity that maybe will just help you prioritize actually fitting that into your schedule. No matter whether you care a lot or a little about a cause, it's more likely that you'll do it if you can get something out of it. And then lastly, the fourth motivation, core motivation is self-interest. And this basically relates to your own priorities in your life at the time. So maybe like building skills or taking on a leadership role so you can add something to your resume might be really important to you at this time. So whether you're interested in going into conservation for your career or not, you're more likely to show up for an event where you think you might learn a new skill, like using certain tools that you've never used before, or taking on a leadership role, like I mentioned, where you can actually manage other people and help to train them and get them oriented to an activity. And as long as that event allows you to have the training and support that you need to make that happen, you might be really motivated to participate more than you would if you weren't learning a new skill. So that's just an example of self-interest. The important thing for everybody to remember when you're planning your own events and activities is how can you tap into all of these different motivations so that you're creating a welcoming experience for as many people as possible. And that really does only apply if you're trying to get a lot of people involved. You might not want to get a ton of people involved in a certain activity. Maybe you want to keep it small for some reason. That's totally fine. But the most important thing to remember is there's no right or wrong motivations for joining an event or a cause. And actually, people's motivations change over time. So even if somebody started coming to an event for the ocean, for example, because they got course credit or extra credit, when they actually go there and they meet new people and they learn about the cause, maybe their altruistic motivation will grow over time. So it's just important to, in summary, if you want to engage many people in your events and activities, build that people power for the cause, like I referenced earlier, you should be thinking about how to tap into all of these different motivations. Okay, so let me just pause there for a second because I've been going over a ton of information, big picture stuff, and we're about to get into some of the nuts and bolts on event planning. So I just want to see if anybody has any thoughts, questions, or reflections they want to pop in the chat really quickly. We're going to have more time at the end for questions overall as well, but if you've got anything here, I'll just give you a second. Okay, great. Seeing none, I'm excited to get into some more of the tools and tangible tips that you can use when you're event planning. All right, so I have a couple different tools here that I'm going to go over. And the first one is the POP planning tool here. So this basically stands for, it's an acronym that stands for purpose, outcome, and process. And when you start thinking through your event plan, this is a good little sketch to draw out before you even get started. The purpose is basically the why behind your putting on your event. So it's kind of like your conservation mission statement we talked about earlier. For example, you might think about what the overall impact you're trying to make or the overall message and awareness that you want people to experience from your event. The outcome is the what that will come from running your event. And so that's a little bit more tangible. That might be specific things like 50 people are going to come and clean up the beach and no more litter will be there. So that's kind of like what's the measurable results that you're going to get out of your event. And then the process is the how you're going to do it all. And this is basically all of the other components of pulling off an event, the logistics, the people, the plans, the agenda. It's usually the stuff that people think about first, but we find that it's very helpful to start with the purpose and the outcome so that it's easier for you to plan the rest of your activities and make good strategic decisions about it as you go. So the next tool I'll talk about is the 3 Ps, but it's just basically categories that you can use when you're thinking through all the different parts of your plan. And we think that this helps you create a well-rounded event if you think about people, partnerships, and publicity. And so what I mean by that, the people are really the team of folks who you are engaging and who are running the event or activity themselves. So that's the volunteers, the leaders, maybe staff who are actively making sure that the event goes well. Partnerships is basically like the coalition of organizations or businesses or associations who are all helping to contribute in some way to the success of your event. And maybe some of those are also actually running the event themselves, but that's not totally necessary. It's great to have well-rounded partnerships so that you can utilize a ton of different types of resources that people might have. And we'll talk a little bit about this at the very end, but maybe you have some local businesses who really care about the cause that you're working on, and they want to donate raffle prizes, for example, to your event. That's a really great example of utilizing a partnership and their specific resources to make your event more well-rounded. And then the third P is publicity. And that's basically the amplification effects that you can add when you incorporate publicity before, during, and after your event. And I know for those who joined the third session, we talked quite a bit about promoting your event on social media and publicizing what you're doing. So that's where all of those components come in. The last thing I want to mention about this tool and the general idea of goal setting and planning your event is that there is a tool, SMART Goals, that people may have heard before. It's an acronym as well. I've actually also heard of SMARTIE goals, SMARTIE, which stands for strategic, measurable, ambitious, realistic, as well as time-bound, inclusive, and equitable. And so that those kind of worksheets and acronyms can help you just really set good specific goals, and that can be utilized all throughout the event planning stage. And I recommend folks to check out that website underneath there that's listed on the slide if you want to see a specific worksheet to help guide you through. Okay, next thing we're going to talk about is developing a backwards plan. And I actually have a sample World Ocean Day oriented event that folks can go ahead and take a look at. You can scan the QR code that's here up on the slide. I'll also just drop a link to the document in the chat right now for those who are following along live in the webinar. But I just want to kind of share how you can put all of these different tools together. So here you can see that we've got a sample event where we're running an educational webinar about mangrove protection in Indonesia. And the purpose is basically to educate and inspire attendees who are interested in protecting the ocean to take action and help protect mangroves specifically. And then in the outcome, like I mentioned earlier, we've got some very specific, tangible, measurable items that we want to come out of it. We want 100 people to attend, to hear about from a bunch of different people, a broad range of people, about why protecting mangroves is important for our blue planet. And then also we're going to offer people a chance to take action right then and there. So at least 50 people will sign up to stay involved in continued efforts, and also submit a short story about why they think protecting our blue planet and 30% of our planet by 2030 is important. So that's the beginning. If we go to the next page, we can actually see some of the process points, which includes when the webinar will be and what the agenda looks like. And then there's, in the sample plan, a ton of other details of all the different things that you might want to think about as you're going through your event plan. But on the next slide, I want to show everybody, not just somebody, show everybody a tool that I love to use, which is called a backwards plan. And that you can kind of see here in this grid where the way you do this is actually set up your realms or categories. So you can see here, we've got the webinar itself, people, partnerships, publicity, and also logistics. And then we kind of put the time at the top here. So this is by April, May, June 1st, June 8th, and then after the event. And then we put the goals on the right-hand side. So that's everything we're working to accomplish. And then we basically work backwards in time and break down all the steps in each of the categories related to the goals that we have. So you can see the steps on the slide here. List out all the categories, set your goals, and then work backwards. And then the biggest thing to know is that this is not a document or a plan that you finalize and print off and never change again. It's something that will keep evolving, because never in my life of planning any events has everything gone exactly as I planned in the very beginning when I was, figuring out exactly what I wanted to have happen in an event. So the plan is just a way for you to stay organized as you go and help you make decisions if bumps in the road or challenges come up. So it's totally fine to adjust it. But hopefully that's helpful for folks to see a little example of a small event, just an online webinar, and how to use some of these tools when you're putting together your own activities. Okay, so the last thing that I'm going to kind of go over before we open it up for questions from anybody, or if you want to hear more about any of the different categories in planning, is a little mini lesson on fundraising, because I was sharing with Laura as we were preparing for this training again, and I've run this session a few times in our advocacy training series, but I was kind of remembering how I personally have gone through professional trainings on all of these different categories for days, like 2 or 3 day sessions on just recruiting people to come be a part of your event. So obviously we only have an hour in this advocacy training. I can't possibly go into all the details, but fundraising is always a very popular topic that we usually get asked about. So I thought it would be helpful to wrap up with some tips specifically related to raising money and securing additional resources for your own events and activities. So there's a few steps here. And before I get into the steps, I also think it's important to remember and recognize for myself that not everybody has experience raising money. And some people feel that it's kind of a hard or uncomfortable thing to do, to ask somebody to, give you money for whatever it is. But I myself have had a lot of experience professionally asking people to contribute to a cause, whether that's just explaining what I'm trying to do and saying, here's why we need some funds and we'd love for you to donate, and here's what's going to happen if you do contribute to the cause. But I also started off when I was younger, getting some concrete skills and experiences actually fundraising, because fundraising isn't even just raising money. It can also be, selling things to people so they get that transactional buyback from it. Or it can also be just asking people for their time. Like if you wanted somebody to come volunteer with you, you're using some of the same sort of skills as you would if you're raising money. So very specifically, when I was growing up, and Laura and I were also talking about how we shared some of these experiences, we were both in music or other extracurricular activities for school, where each year we'd have to sell candy bars or magazine subscriptions to help raise money to support the music program at my school, for example. So I am kind of curious before we jump into these steps, if anybody here on the webinar today does have experience fundraising, and if you do, if you can kind of share, what kind of fundraiser you did or what you fundraised for, if you did anything like that in the past. And like I said, it can totally be something that you were, selling something for. I also was a Girl Scout and sold Girl Scout cookies, which is a very popular fundraiser here in the United States. And that was a really helpful experience for me too, that helped me become more of a professional fundraiser for causes when I grew up. Yeah, anybody have any experience with fundraising? And if you don't, feel free to just say, no, I actually haven't ever fundraised before, because I'm kind of curious to know about that too. I'll give everyone a second to think about it. Okay. A couple folks have posted. So it says I fundraised for World's Greatest Shave, my brother's rugby trip to Fiji, and a few other things. Wow, cool. That sounds awesome. Another person says we had a Valentine's Day fundraiser where we made little goodie bags and people could choose what to add to it. And we fundraised for an aquarium trip. Awesome. Great example. That's awesome. Well, thank you guys for sharing some of your experiences, and for others, feel free to keep putting them in the chat. But let me go over this little mini lesson, and then we'll start to wrap up and see what other questions you all have. So there's 5 steps. So the first step, sorry, Laura, go back to the other slide. First step is to determine what resources you need for your event or activity. And you should use your plans that you've already created, like we went through, to make a list of all the different resources and supplies you think you might need. So maybe for your event, you need space, and that might come with a cost, for example, like to rent out a room in the library. You may need materials, like printing out flyers or worksheets that you want people to use. You may want to spend some money on advertising to promote people coming to your activity or your campaign. And then maybe you also think about other expertise that you don't have, even like if you want somebody to take a bunch of really awesome photos during your event that you can use, later on, you might want to hire a photographer, for example. There's a lot of different things that you might put down on your list of resources and supplies and expertise that you need from your plan. Once you've done that, the second step, as you can see here, is to determine which resources you can secure without needing any money. And this is where that partnership piece of your plan can really come in handy. Many organizations have different types of assets. So for example, you might be partnering with an aquarium. If you're working with your school organization, like the student government or the environmental club, and you want to put on an event. Maybe you reach out to your local aquarium and they agree to participate and even give you for free a cool room, event space in the aquarium. That's a great example. Now you don't have to spend money trying to reserve a space and paying a fee. There are a lot of other examples like that. I gave one earlier where you can get small businesses or environmentally minded businesses involved and ask them to donate raffle prizes if you're going to have a raffle at your event. And then there's also people who have involved, I'm sure, and a lot of folks who you know might have their own individual talents. Like maybe you have a friend who takes awesome photos all the time. Their social media, their TikTok, their Instagram is like bopping. That's a really hip word to use. And you're like, you should just come to my event and actually take photos. If you could do that and like volunteer in that way, that would be so useful. And they probably will feel really excited about having a role in a pretty cool event, especially if it's cause oriented or conservation oriented. So after you go down the list and try to figure out like how you can do everything without money, there's still likely going to be some things that you just need to spend money on. And that might be like posters or flyers or travel costs or t-shirts for volunteers or whatever it might be. So it is important to know exactly what it is that you are looking to raise money for your event. And I should mention something here that a lot of these fundraising examples folks were sharing, that's like putting on a fundraising event in and of itself for a cause, which is a little bit different from what I'm talking about, where you're just saying, I want to do something and I need money to actually put on this event and activity. So all the other types of fundraising where you're just like getting people to contribute to a cause is awesome, but this is specifically about you needing resources for your own activity. So let's go on to the next step. Step 3, after you've figured out your list of resources and what you need your money for, is to actually create what's commonly referred to as an elevator pitch. The name comes from riding up a not too long of an elevator and having only minutes next to the person you're there to kind of pitch what you're talking about. So it's usually like 30 seconds long. It's not too complicated. Obviously, you could expand it out if you need to or want to, like in a donation request letter, or if you were going to actually put together a grant proposal or write up, a submission for a scholarship. It might be longer. But to start with, and just to get some folks to donate once off to a cause, having a shorter elevator pitch that you can probably come up with in a couple minutes if you've already done all these other steps can be very useful. So there's a little bit of an outline here that I included. So your conservation mission statement. So basically, like in the example that we went into in more detail earlier about the protecting mangroves in Indonesia, you would just say something like, hey, here's who I am. I'm planning this event, and it's all about helping to protect mangroves in Indonesia to help support the health of our blue planet. So that's the mission statement. It's pretty straightforward. It's what you're trying to accomplish or work on. And the next thing is you probably want to share a little bit more about your event or activity. I'm putting on this educational webinar, and I am in need of some funds to help us pay for some of the refreshments or supplies that we're going to have at the webinar for the people who come in person, for example. And then you want to answer the question for yourself, what's in it for them, or what shared values do we have? So for example, maybe there's a business that you're reaching out to ask for money or donations or whatever, and you can say, I know that Patagonia or REI or another environmentally oriented business cares about our environment. So I thought you might be willing to give a contribution or donate some money. So then you get into the final part of the structure here, including a strong and direct ask. You say something like, could you donate $500 to provide all our volunteers with t-shirts for the cleanup? So that's kind of an example of a little elevator pitch, and happy to delve in more into that if people have more questions about it. But once you've got all of those pieces, you know what you need money for, you've figured out what you can, garner from resources, and then you develop your elevator pitch, you basically need to start with step 4, researching potential funding sources. And I've already kind of referenced a few of these, but grants and scholarships, corporate sponsorships or donations from businesses, or maybe even just figuring out a way to crowdsource and charge a small attendance fee and be able to explain that to people, what that money is going to, might be an option for you if you're, running up against challenges, getting people to say yes to your donation requests. So you want to make a big list of them, and then step 5 is just start asking. And I guess my final tip on this step that I didn't write specifically on the slide is that it is okay if you get no's. If you start asking people to contribute and donate to you and they say, sorry, we can't, that doesn't mean that your idea is a bad one or that your event isn't worth fundraising. It just means that right then and there, that person cannot do that activity or contribute that those funds. So don't stop if you get no's, just keep on asking more people and you'll likely get folks who want to contribute. So that's my mini fundraising lesson. I'm just going to spend a couple more minutes talking about resources that we have, more resources that we have related to event planning for everybody. And this is all obviously very specific to World Ocean Day coming up on 8th of June. And I encourage everybody to just go check out our website, the worldoceanday.org resources page, because we've got an entire toolkit related to event planning that has a lot of other great tips and tools that we didn't even cover today. We also have social media toolkits and action guides. The action guides are actually very specific, like I referenced earlier, about taking a really big cause like 30 by 30 and boiling it down so that you can have a very simple ask, and giving everybody some ideas on how they can include that ask or the conservation action into their plans for World Ocean Day. The last things I'll say here too is we do have a world map and events calendar. So for anybody who's looking to participate in events, you can go check that out. And if you are planning your own conservation related events and activities, please submit them. We have that open all year round. So anytime you're looking to share your activities and events to the world, you should go ahead and do that. And then there's also some other great resources and supplies there as well, including our sustainable and socially conscious clothing and merchandise store. So feel free to check all of that stuff out. And don't forget to follow us on social media. So with that, I'm going to pass it over back to Laura so that we can have some time for Q&A. And we put this kind of guiding slide here so you can kind of remember the different categories. If you have a specific question there or anything that we've covered, we're happy to answer them.
Yeah, so again, if anybody has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, use the Q&A function. So the last 2 steps that Sam just went over, steps 4 and 5, talking about building your structure for your event, and step number 5 being just start asking. There is one question in our Q&A right now that says about the partnerships. How can I introduce my event idea to an NGO or project to collaborate with the organization of the event? So basically just asking, I guess, how to go about approaching asking for those kinds of partnerships, which is sort of something that we covered, but there's a lot of nuance involved there for sure. And so I think it would be really great, Sam, if you could share some just general tips and tricks on approaching some of the bigger organizations, whether it's NGOs or corporate sponsorships, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Thanks, Laura. And thank you to whoever asked that question. I think it's a really important one. And I would just echo what Laura said, that last slide that we had. Maybe we can quickly go back to it for a minute just to show folks that elevator pitch, which is very useful for fundraising, but it's actually a very useful structure to utilize when you're looking for partners as well. I think that my other big tip would be to, just like we talked about with the motivations, don't pigeonhole yourself, or what I mean by that phrase is don't just think only environmental groups are going to want to get involved with my environmentally themed event or campaign. Because actually a lot of other associations and companies and businesses, and we kind of have been talking about this a little bit, even other cause related issues, like maybe there's a student government association in your school that usually doesn't really do environmental work, but maybe they decided that they want to this year. And so I kind of think that looking at anyone and everyone who could possibly get involved and using this little structure here where you think about what you're going to say to them, And especially that third question, what is in it for them? Or what are the shared values we have? So I'll just use the student government or student council as an example. What they might care about is representing the school really well and providing, support and leadership training, and representing the voices of students to, the teachers and the principal and the board of directors or whatever. So you might say to them, you might appeal to them as leaders and say something like, we know that you guys are the leaders of the school, and, we think that everybody kind of shares this idea of protecting our environment. We would love for you to take on a leadership role with us and coordinate this event together so that we can show kind of a united front from the school that young people and students here care about reducing plastic waste, for example. So I hope that that structure is helpful and can totally be applied to partners, to people, even to publicity oriented folks. If you've got a student newspaper or the media that you want to reach out to, you can use that same structure basically for any sort of approaching that you're doing. And don't forget, if you get no's, it's not a problem. If 1 in 10 people say yes to getting involved, that's pretty good. And the more people you ask, probably what's going to happen is they'll figure out ways in the future to make that no a yes. So don't think that, a no is a bad thing.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. I hope that helps answer the question to whoever asked that. I think approaching, like we said, those bigger corporate sponsorships, bigger NGOs, it can definitely be a little overwhelming. So it's always good to hear some specific advice about that. We do have another question in the Q&A. We have one in the chat as well from Forba, asking for any organizations or links that are open to sponsoring or donating to local African associations or individuals who are not so renowned but are working in their communities. So I'm just going to step in and I'm going to send a link in the chat here. This is not necessarily a link to any specific organizations. However, this is a link to subscribe to the Rising Blue Network newsletter, which is a monthly newsletter that we share amongst our youth organization network, and always has dozens of different fundraising opportunities, internships, grant opportunities, different competitions and stuff. So I definitely recommend subscribing so that you can check that as it comes to your inbox every month. And there's always, we try to really make sure there's geographic diversity in there as well, so we can kind of cater to as many people as possible. So there's the link in the chat there for anybody who is interested in subscribing. And then to answer Maria's question in the Q&A, she said she has a hard time with recruiting volunteers that actually stick with your association for a long time and be proactive, so that we don't have to be running after them to do the things that they agreed to do within an appropriate time frame. I definitely understand where you're coming from. It's always tough to manage a big group of people that always have different priorities, but as it relates to an event, I think there are some pretty specific ways in terms of like assigning roles that might be helpful. So Sam, if you kind of want to share any of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. I think that's a really great lead in. I think exactly like Laura said, if you have a specific event and folks have said they want to volunteer, like a once-off event or a series of events, it's a little bit easier than what you're referencing, Maria, with your question, but I will touch on some tips with that too. But I think the idea of figuring out how can everybody's involvement really be valued. And that doesn't necessarily mean just saying, well, we really value your time being here. We're so appreciative that you're here. It's giving them a role. And I often tell people to think really big, like break down everything into tiny, tiny little responsibilities. And I'll share a personal example of an event I went to this week that was work related. I was there and it was like a big event where lots of people were coming in and there was a little presentation. It was a fundraising event actually. And I hadn't signed up to volunteer at all, but because I, work with the organization, I thought, oh, I'm sure there's something that I can do. And one of the roles they had there was just greeting people who are coming in and checking their name off on a list. It's pretty easy task to do. And all I had to do was stand there and, but then I felt a little bit more like, oh, good. I'm glad I came early. I have something very tangible to do that's going to help this event run smoothly. So I think that's a really good, piece of advice, Laura, is like just looking for ways to give people a specific role, no matter how big or how small. Greeter, photographer, public speaker, and MC of the event. Somebody who is just helping with setup and takedown. Those are usually pretty popular and not too tough of tasks. You don't have to talk to anybody. You don't have to have special talents. You just need to be able to do some physical labor. So yeah, I think that's a really good idea. But the one other thing I wanted to say briefly about recruiting folks to stay involved with your campaign or organization or association, the first thing I would say is just make sure your expectations are in an appropriate place, because everybody changes their mind. And even though some people, probably like yourself, are very committed and excited about all the work that this association can do, other people just might have it on the 10th or 15th or 20th place in their priority list. And maybe some stuff like that's really important comes up in their life, like somebody in their family gets sick, right? So I think that I try to remind people that there's this rule of halves or 50-50 rule. Basically, 50% of anybody who signs up to do something is likely going to show up. And then 50% of those people are likely to do the next thing. And then 50% of those people are likely going to maybe take on leadership within your group. So kind of multiply by 10. If you know you want 30 people in your group regularly, at some point over the course of the year, a couple of years, you're probably going to be recruiting around 300 different people, because not everybody's going to stick around. And those numbers are just examples. That's not like a hard and fast rule. It definitely depends on how well you do at tapping into those 4 motivations we talked about earlier. So that's kind of a good exercise to use, is like, okay, well, maybe we just ask everybody, why are you motivated to be in this association? And maybe rank them. Is it mostly because you care about the cause, altruistic? Is it because you're like the people and you like hanging out and chatting with people, social? Is it because you're looking for leadership experience and to build your resume or self-interest? Or is it because every time we have a meeting, we have food, which maybe you don't do? So once you figure out what people are motivated by, you can kind of adjust and say, well, maybe we should have a fun event after our meeting so that some of these folks who are there to hang out and meet with people have that space to tap into that social motivation. So yeah, so that would be my some of my answers. There's a lot of other tips too, but I think that if you use some of those motivations and thinking about leadership opportunities for folks, that can really help.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. I think that's super, super helpful. And I think it does go back to talking about the 3 Ps, the PPP goals. The first one being people and finding the right people. So kind of going full circle to, really making sure you're staying organized and you have that plan set out from the beginning, I think will really help mitigate any of those issues that you might find throughout trying to manage a big group of people. I got a message in the chat saying that link to the Rising Blue Network newsletter was not working. I just, if you go to worldoceanday.org, if you click the youth drop-down menu, the subscription link is under the Join Global Youth Movement link. So if it's not working for you, if you can't copy and paste it, you can find it there. And again, feel free. We have some more time left. We have a couple of announcements we want to get to, but if anybody has any additional questions, again, feel free to continue sending them in the chat and using the Q&A feature. Sam, do you want to maybe go over 1 or 2 more questions, or go to announcements first and see if people have questions after?
Oh, that's a good idea. Why don't we do announcements first? Because I've got a little flexibility, so I can always hang on for a few more minutes afterwards as well for more questions.
Cool. So do you want to cover announcements, or?
Oh, you got it.
All right, cool. So our announcements, as I mentioned, here is the link in the middle for the Rising Blue Network newsletter if you do want to type in the whole thing, but I think just going to the website is easier. But first things first, again, we really, really appreciate everybody who has taken part and participated in advocacy training, and we will be able to offer certificates. So be sure to check your inboxes after this weekend. In order to earn one of those certificates, we're just going to have a short feedback survey for you to fill out. We don't have that link ready quite yet, but it will definitely be sent out to all of you after this weekend if you would like to have a certificate of participation for this program. That's totally something that's possible. So let us know. Again, if you have any questions about that, feel free to email me. I'll drop my email in the chat once again. And then, like I said, here's the newsletter. kind of related to that, World Ocean Day Youth Advisory Council applications are going to be opening in late June this year. It's a very exciting thing. I can't believe that this one cohort that we have for the year 2022-2023 is almost over, and we're going to be having some new youth leaders join our council. It's a really exciting opportunity for young people ages I believe 16 through 21 from any country in the world. And if you want to be notified when that application opens, the best thing you can do, again, is subscribe to the Rising Blue Network newsletter, because you'll be notified right away when that application goes live. So I definitely recommend. Thank you, Sam, for dropping that link in the chat. You can check out our current members. They are all incredible leaders in their own right, all working on different conservation projects and events in their own communities. And so I definitely recommend checking that out for anybody who is interested. I think that's pretty much it as far as announcements are concerned. So if we do have a couple more questions, definitely feel free to send them in the chat. I have a little bit of flexibility too. We got a couple more minutes left. So I think that honestly, like I said at the beginning, every time we have this session, I learn something new every time. And I guess I have a question, Sam. What is for somebody who has never planned their own event before from start to finish, maybe they have never even participated in an event before, maybe they have, but for somebody who is fresh and new to planning an event, what is like the number one thing that they can do to not be like super overwhelmed by the process? I know staying organized is a huge deal, but what does that actually look like? I know we have that. Oh, I'm glad I took that question out of your mouth. We have the backwards plan, but I think there is a little bit more of like a mental component to that, and making sure that you're kind of not overwhelmed and don't have that much anxiety.
Yeah, totally. Still to this day, after I've been planning different events for 15 years, sometimes with really big events or important ones, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's nerve-wracking. It's keeping me up at night, whether I'm organized totally or not so organized. So yeah, it can be tough. But I think to answer your question, Laura, if somebody is like has an idea and they want to plan their own event, I think that it's good to try and hold on to that idea until you can feel like you really know and you've got a drive to do your own event and activities because of experience. And what I mean by that is if you've not volunteered at a similar type of event or any events, just start volunteering. And if you really want to learn from it, not just participate, you might even find the event organizers and ask them like, hey, I'm really interested. I have this idea for an event, but I don't have experience planning. Like, could I like shadow you and learn from you? Would you mind if I help you specifically? And could you give me some like advice? And can I ask you questions along the way? I think that's my biggest suggestion, because I know I learn a lot because of the experiences I have, not because I read a textbook or listened to a bunch of webinars. So yeah, look for stuff that you want to get involved with, look for similar types of events and just go do them all if you have the availability and liberty to do that. But don't be afraid to ask folks if you can actually learn from them in a more specific way as well.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. I think that's super helpful. And to kind of bring us full circle here, before we let you all go, I did drop the link in the chat to the recordings of the first 3 sessions of advocacy training, because I think that last little bit, the really holding on to your event idea, really goes back to the core purpose of session 1 and session 2. It relates back to session 3 as well, talking about your conservation mission statement and learning from others. So if you're interested, if you missed out on sessions 1 through 3, I definitely recommend checking them out. I may be biased in saying that, but I think they're great. But yeah, and that being said, thank you all again so much for joining us for this session and for advocacy training as a whole. Really quick, at oceanproject.org, If you have any questions, again, about our youth initiative, the World Ocean Day Youth Advisory Council, any of our advocacy trainings or webinars, definitely send me an email. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. But other than that, thank you again. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, your morning, your evening, your afternoon, wherever in the world you are. And we will see you online soon. Happy almost World Ocean Day.
Bye, everybody. Thanks for joining us.